welcome to the 2025 Virtual Horse Management Seminar. This is day 3, or the last day of talks. We have had some fantastic talks, so hopefully you were able to join us. If not, I'm sorry, but we have been recording all of our seminars, and they will get posted. Everybody will get an email probably around the middle of March when they are posted and ready on our Equine Science Center YouTube page. We do have some follow-up talks from some of those that have been posted in or have been presented in past years. So I asked Kyle to go ahead and type in the chat or post in the chat where you can find recordings for previous years. If this is your first year joining, welcome. But never fear, you can listen to all of our previous seminar participants. And actually, we have someone today who had a wonderful seminar from last year as well, and I'll be talking more about that in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. Introduce myself, and then I have a couple little other housekeeping tips for you. So I am Dr. Carrie Williams. I'm the Equine Extension Specialist at Rutgers University, so that allows me to give wonderful seminars like today and bring education to all the stakeholders, both in New Jersey, surrounding country, and other countries. So I'm really excited to see where everybody's from. So what you're going to do for me is everybody is going to take out a different something to get on the web, whether it's a phone, another computer, you can open up another screen. Everybody's going to go to menti.com, menti.com. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to look at a Menti quiz. Basically, it's for me to find out where everybody is from. So again, I'm going to share my screen. Kyle's going to post the website, the menti.com, and a code. You're going to need to add in this code, which is, and as soon as I load, 96057540. And I see some of you are already ahead of the game. You know where I'm going with this. So when you're adding in your state, please don't abbreviate, spell it out, because when you spell it out, the more people we get from that state, the bigger the word's going to get. So if you say New Jersey and then someone else says NJ, they don't get counted together. So I do see New Jersey and Pennsylvania are kind of going back and forth with being the biggest and having the most attendees. And I like to just sit here for a minute and continue to watch everything change. So we'll even kind of see as other countries. If you're not from the United States and don't have a state, please just put in your country. And I see Canada. That is one of them. Welcome, Canada. Thank you for attending. I'm going to give us a few minutes. We only have 54 to 55 people logging on. I see we're almost up to 100 attendees. So I'm going to let this go and just watch it. Yeah, we have 124 attendees. So welcome, everybody. I'm very excited. So again, just give your state. So I see New York and New York State, so they're not going to be combined. They're going to stay separate because it really has to be the exact same word. And then as we get more and more people, the word is going to get bigger. So I see Michigan and Washington, Massachusetts, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee. So far, Canada's our only country to chime in, but if you are from another country, welcome. You might not be able to get on to Menti, and that is fine. We'll let this go and we'll let it continue changing for a little bit, but I'm going to go to the next slide because I also want to know what you do. So this allows you to select 3, and you can pick your primary interaction with horses. So up to 3. So say you're a horse owner, but also give lessons and you're your barn manager, you can pick those 3. Or if you're a veterinarian and own horses, then you can select those 2. So what is your primary interaction? And I'm sure if you own horses, you're also an enthusiast, but I put that on there for people who might not own horses, but really just want the information that we have to share today. If you are in this other category, I would love to hear what other category you are participating in. So go ahead in that chat box and just keep in mind the chat box is only for the panelists and hosts to see. The attendees will not see it. So go ahead and type in what your other profession is. I know usually we get, and yep, I'm seeing it come through already, therapeutic riding. We usually have some path instructors or some rescue organizations. Yeah, language speech pathologist, welcome, 4-H club leader, extension staff, a gala, massage, path. Excellent. Oh, and I do have someone saying hello from the Philippines. So welcome. Thank you for being in another country. We have some breeders involved. Oh, thank you so much. So I love reading what everybody does for a living, where you're involved. So this gives us kind of a nice demographic. So welcome everybody, all the trainers and barn managers out there and veterinarians. I'm going to go back to the word cloud here. This word cloud has changed just a little bit with the different states involved or that are watching today. So again, welcome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and do just a few other little tidbits of information for you. So today, that's kind of the last time I'm going to be monitoring the chat box. So if you have a question for the speaker, please post them in the box that's called Q&A. It's actually a couple buttons over from where you found the chat box. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see the button that says Q&A. If you go ahead and click on that, the question box will pop up and you can ask a question. So I'm going to be moderating the questions while the speaker is speaking, and I'm going to be saving some of those questions to ask after the seminar or after that speaker is done. And we'll ask the questions live. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all of the questions from all of the speakers, but please make sure to put them in that box and not the chat box, because a lot of things tend to get lost in the chat if I'm not really monitoring that all the time. Okay. So where you can do with the chat box is if you're having any technology difficulties, you're not hearing something is wrong on your screen, you can go ahead and type in the chat, because that'll come to myself as a panelist, but also our man behind the scenes, Kyle Hartman. He's behind that Rutgers Equine Science Center logo, and he's helping me with all of the technology today. So go ahead and you can type in the chat and you can ask him questions, and he's also kind of helping me moderate things as we go today. So with that being said, I think that's all that I need to do as an introduction. So what I'm going to do is ask Dr. Herbst to come on her screen and go ahead and share. And I am going to give your introduction and then turn it over to you. So we have today presenting Health and Management of U.S. Senior Horses. It's Dr. Alisa Herbst. She received her bachelor's degree in equine management from Nüttingen Geislingen University in Germany, and I hope I got it a little bit closer than I did last time. I have been practicing. During her undergraduate studies, she contributed to equine research on wastage of standardbred racehorses and on equine asthma at Massey University in New Zealand. So then at Purdue University in the US, respectively, she then completed a PhD program at the University of Kentucky, where she studied immunological aging and loss of muscle mass in older horses. So since 2022, she's been a postdoc here at Rutgers University. So I'm thrilled for her to continue studying muscle and the senior horse, and for giving us some of her information that she has found with some of her studies to date. So take it away, Dr. Herbst.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So welcome everybody to this first talk tonight, which is about the health and management of our U.S. senior horses.
Oop, Dr. Herbst, can I interrupt you 1 minute? Can you go ahead and put them into slideshow? We're still seeing your presenter mode.
Oh, you do? On my end, it says it's different. Hold on.
No problem.
All right. So how's this now?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Can you see the slides? Is it advancing also?
We're still on the title, but it should advance. Yep, right there. Good
Okay. All right. So today we will talk about the age at which a horse is considered to be foaled. We will talk about the primary uses of senior horses. We will speak a little bit about retirement. We will cover the preventive healthcare and medical conditions in senior horses. And lastly, we will talk about loss of muscle mass in senior horses, which is one of my personal favorite topics and also one of my main areas of research. So with that, let's get started. Our first question, at what age is a horse considered old? Well, so we know from us humans that there is a variety of age definitions. So for example, we have chronological age, which is just year by year by year. But then there is also physiological old age, which is when we usually see some declines in exercise capacity and also other physical functions daily. In addition to that, there is the demographic old age, which is based on survival rates. So basically, how many people survived up to a certain age. In horses, the situation is quite similar. So we also have physiological old age, which we think starts somewhere between 18 and 20 years, because in horses that are older than 20, we see some changes in exercise capacity, for example, maximum heart rate, maximum oxygen uptake capacity, and even the horse's ability to thermoregulate. But in addition to the physiological old age, we also have demographic old age. And here, horses are already considered to be old at 15 years. And that is so because about 25% of horses have already passed away at 15 years, while about 75% are still alive. And if we use this demographic definition of old age, horses that are 30 years old are actually considered to be very old because 25% of the horses are only alive, while 75% of the horses have already passed away. Now, I know that there are also some other definitions of age out there, for example, senior age. So what is senior age? Scientifically, we actually consider horses that are 15 years of age to be of senior age. And then we have also geriatric age. And geriatric age is probably my favorite age definition because it's not really an age definition. So geriatrics really is an aspect of medicine that is dealing with the elderly and medical conditions that are affecting the elderly. But it's not really an age definition. Nevertheless, I see it used a lot. And in fact, usually people are referring to horses that are about 20 years of age as a geriatric. All right, now we're moving on into our next section, primary uses of senior horses. And you can see here that I'm using the term senior horses, so I'm referring to horses that are at least 15 years of age. And before we really move into the primary uses of horses in this age group, I kind of have to introduce you to our US Senior Horse Survey. So we were interested in the needs and management and the healthcare of senior horses, so those that are 15 years or older that reside in the United States. And to learn more about this age group, we conducted this online survey in 2020, and that was advertised through press releases and social media. And the reason I'm really telling you about this survey is because the majority of the information that I'm sharing today is from this survey. So it's kind of the basis of most of my slides. So if you have an older horse, it's actually possible that you participated in this survey. We had a very large number of participants, close to 3,000 participants. And if I remember this correctly, we had responses from all states of the United States. So with this background information, we can now move finally into the primary uses of US senior horses. So in our survey study, we had kind of asked the participants, well, what is the primary use of your senior horse right now? And we had 4 response categories. We had competition, pleasure, retired, and semi-retired. And semi-retired basically means that the horse was officially retired from riding or driving exercises, but it was still doing some other type of exercise, for example, lunging, long lining, hand walking, any of those that we considered semi-retired. Now over here in the pie chart, you can see the distribution of the responses. And what I kind of blanked out here is the labeling. So which section of this pie chart corresponds to which of these use categories? And I did that on purpose so that I could ask you to think about what you think is the correct labeling. So is competition 38% of our senior horses, or maybe is it only 10%? I'll give you a moment to think about this. All right, so revealing the answers now, you probably guessed it. The majority of our senior horses were retired, and then another large group was used for pleasure riding. Semi-retired was not very frequent, nor was competition. So this data was really all about the senior horses in the United States, but how about other countries? I know that we have an international audience tonight. In fact, there were some similar survey studies conducted in other countries, specifically in the United Kingdom and in Australia. And here we have some data from the United Kingdom, where also the #1 use of horses was hacking or pleasure riding. The second most common was retired or companion. And what was done differently in that study is that participants could select more than one of these categories. So they say they selected that their horse was used for pleasure riding, they could also count it under riding school. And that might contribute to that high proportion of horses being used for pleasure riding compared to what we saw in the United States. But the top two most common categories were pleasure and retired. How about Australia? In Australia, we actually see a similar situation here. Pleasure riding and retired horses were the two most common categories. All right, so returning from other countries back to our US senior horse survey. We also had some questions about the management of these horses. And on this slide specifically, I wanted to share with you exercise intensity and frequency. We thought that would be quite interesting to learn about. So I'm showing you here two graphs, and I'll walk you through these graphs. So here on the left, we can see the exercise frequency in times per week. And then over here, we can see the horse ages in years. And clearly, some horses exercise less than once a year, and some exercise less than once per week, and some exercise multiple times a day. And the majority of our horses seem to have exercised between 1 and 4 times per week. What we can also see in this figure here is that there was a relationship with age. That's what this line here shows. The older the horse, the less frequent the exercise. And I guess this is something that can be expected. What you can also do with this figure, if you do have a senior horse over 15 years, you can see where your horse falls in this plot here, because each one of these little circles is actually one horse. So maybe your horse is exercising multiple times a day, or maybe not so frequently. Okay, this next figure here is looking at the exercise intensity during a typical session. And here we have different categories from low to high, and then again plotted against the horse ages in years. And clearly, the most horses were exercising at a moderate intensity. And again, there was a negative relationship with horse age. So the older the horse, the less intense the exercise. And I guess that's something that we would expect. And here you could also play the little game again and see, well, where would my horse fall in this plot? Is it exercising more intensely or less intensely than some of the others? We also wanted to look at this data in a different way, and that is by primary use category. So now I'm showing you the exercise frequencies again, but this time compared or grouped by the different use categories. So the way to understand these figures is that 50% of the horses are falling in this box, while there is 50% above or below as well. So the central 50% are kind of in this box. And what these so-called box plots help us see is that there is a significant difference between the competition, pleasure, and semi-retired horses, where the exercise frequency is highest in the competition horses, less high in the pleasure horses, and least high in the semi-retired horses. Again, something that we would expect to see. Now over here for the exercise intensity, we have not included the semi-retired horses because their exercise intensity is kind of hard to define. So we thought maybe they'll all end up around low, but we weren't quite sure how to best define that. So we were only looking at competition and pleasure horses. And as expected, competition horses were exercising at a higher intensity than our pleasure horses. All right. So this group of competition horses here that was exercising most intensely and most frequently, we felt like they're probably a special subgroup of our senior horses. And we had a particular interest in that group because we thought maybe they have special needs for healthcare or special management needs. So we took a closer look at our competing senior horses. For example, we asked about the disciplines that these horses were competing in. And I'm summarizing our results on this slide. So here we have the percentage of horses, and then I have blanked out the disciplines here. And that's again to ask you what you think the most common competition discipline in senior horses is. I'll give you a moment to think about that. Most of you probably guessed it, it's dressage. And dressage is actually followed by eventing, hunters, jumpers, rodeo, and Western pleasure. There were also some other disciplines, but they weren't very frequent. What I thought was cool about this, though, is that eventing was pretty common. It's the first time that a study finds that senior horses are relatively frequently being used for eventing, which is quite the intense sport. We also asked about competition levels. And what we can nicely see is that the majority was really competing at a lower beginner or a medium level. But I was very intrigued by this last group here. There are some of these senior horses that are competing at the highest or the international level. I thought, well, these horses are probably between 15 and 20 years, but certainly not over 20. Well, turns out I was wrong. They were between 16 and 25 years of age. So this led us to look whether there were any age differences between the competition levels, and we found that there were none. Okay, now moving from our competing horses, the very fit ones, to the exact opposite into the retired horses. So this is again data from our survey study, and we had asked our survey participants at what age they first retired their horse. You can see here that a small group retired their horses between 1 and 9 years of age, and that was mainly to change their career to full-time breeding. But the majority of our senior horses were actually retired between 15 and 24 years of age, and then there were few left that would retire at an older age. The next question that you might also have in this context is, well, what were the reasons for retirement in these horses? So our survey participants reported a variety of reasons for why their horses were retired, but one of them really stands out, and that is these horse health problems here. So to us, that was a really important point because it kind of led us to think, well, we really need to find a way to, for one, prevent these horse health problems and also treat them in a way so that the horses don't have to be retired. And that could be beneficial for two reasons. Not only would the owners be able to ride these horses for longer, but this could also be beneficial for the horses' health. And we think that because there is a lot of research in humans that shows that staying fit and active and exercising up to an older age can actually prevent the onset of certain medical conditions. It can delay the onset of medical conditions, and it can increase overall well-being in those who are affected by the medical conditions. So while there aren't any studies, as far as I know, that are looking at this specifically in horses, because there is so much data in that regard in humans, we feel like it's probably also applying to horses, and in fact, entering them in some sort of a semi-retirement, as opposed to a full retirement, could actually be beneficial for their health. Another question that we had in the context of retirement was whether there are any risk factors for horses being retired. And the first risk factor that we found was advancing age. That's probably not surprising because the older the horse, the more likely he is to be retired, right? But what did surprise me was that mares were at a higher risk of retirement than geldings. And you might think, well, the mares are going into breeding and that's why they're retired. But it seems like there are a lot of mares that are retired and only a small group of horses that are retired for breeding purposes. So there must be something else going on with the mares and retirement. And thoroughbreds appear to be at a heightened risk compared to a variety of other breeds. This could have something to do with the type of careers that they usually have. Racing, eventing, and so on could predispose them to certain medical conditions. Talking about medical conditions, DSLD, which we also call dropped fetlocks, that is a risk factor, as is laminitis, and as is lameness of any cause. So basically, the way to interpret these risk factors is if your horse is older and is a mare and is a thoroughbred, this horse is at a much higher risk of retirement compared to a younger gelding that is not a thoroughbred. But even just the horse advancing in age is already a risk factor for that horse retiring, which makes sense. All right, so we already spoke a little bit about medical conditions, but this section is really fully about preventive healthcare and medical conditions. So these slides, this first and the next two slides, are talking about the frequencies of preventive healthcare that were provided to the horses that we surveyed. So what I'm showing you here is the percentage of horses on the y-axis that fell into each of these response categories. And here we asked our survey participants whether their horse received wellness exams during the last year. And then we asked, how often did this horse receive the wellness exam? Never, 1 to 2 times per year, 3 to 4 times per year, or over 4 times per year. And I'm not showing you the results right now because it's, again, another question for you. How often do you think did the horses receive wellness exams during the year prior to our survey? Most of you might have guessed it. 1 to 2 times was the most common category. So we'll play the same game again with veterinary care for medical conditions. What do you think? Never was most common. So that could be because some of these horses did not have medical conditions, so they didn't need any vet visits. But I also think that some of the horses that did have medical conditions were also in this group. All right, now we're talking about dental exams or floats. What do you think? 1 to 2 times was most common. And helminthic treatment, so that's our deworming. 1 to 2 times was most common. Okay, lastly, we're now looking at the farrier visits. So here we had some slightly different categories from never to 3 to 4 times per year, and then we're going into the week ranges. What do you think was the most common response category? 5 to 6 weeks. But you can see that there are some horses that received farrier visits 3 times a year or less than that. And from the previous slides, you know that there were some horses that never received a wellness exam and some that never received a float or any dental exams. And we were very interested in those groups of horses because we thought, maybe we can do another risk factor analysis and see what kinds of horses are at a heightened risk of not receiving sufficient preventive care. So first we looked at the vet care visits. Here we found that horses that are used for pleasure riding, semi-retired or retired horses had a higher risk than competition horses. But retired horses also had a heightened risk compared to pleasure horses. So you can already see that our retired horses are at a very high risk of not receiving the wellness exams. Next was our dental care. Here we saw that mares were at a heightened risk compared to geldings, that the risk was again higher in pleasure, semi-retired, and retired horses compared to competition horses. And at this time, the risk was higher in retired horses compared to pleasure and even semi-retired horses. Our last question was about the low farrier attendance. So we defined that as 4 times a year or less. And our mares were again at a heightened risk compared to the geldings. Then gaited breeds were at a higher risk than warm bloods. And pleasure and retired horses, again, at a higher risk than the competition horses, and the retired horses at a higher risk than the pleasure and the semi-retired horses. So the overall story that this is telling is that our mares and our retired horses are at a particularly high risk of not receiving sufficient preventive care. All right, so now we're moving into the prevalence of medical conditions affecting our older horses. And this may be the most important slide that I'll share with you today. So we had asked whether the participants' horses were affected by veterinary diagnosed medical conditions. And it looks like only 36% of the horses were free of veterinary diagnosed medical conditions. So that means that about 2/3 of the horses were affected by a medical condition. And if we expanded our definition to vet or owner diagnosed condition, we see that only about 70%, so basically 30% were free, while 70% of horses were affected by medical conditions. Lastly, we had also asked about clinical signs. That's basically another word for symptoms in humans, where we found that about 32% of the horses were free of clinical signs. So that means that 2/3 of the horses did have clinical signs, or what we would call symptoms in humans. Clearly, the majority of our US senior horses are not healthy. And it's important to us to understand the medical conditions better, to find ways to prevent them, and to treat them in a way that these horses have good welfare. So naturally, our next question for our survey participants was, well, what medical condition does your horse have? And what I'm showing you in this table here is the medical conditions, which I've blanked out so that I could ask you what you think the most common medical condition in our senior horses is. But then we have here the prevalence of veterinary diagnosed diseases and owner diagnosed diseases. So owner diagnosed is the owner, but also a farrier could fall in this category, or a fellow equestrian. If the owner of the horse was a veterinarian, then we counted him over here. So back to our original question, what do you think is the most common medical condition affecting senior horses? All right, it is osteoarthritis. And that's followed by dental disorders, which is followed by lameness. And you might say, well, horses with osteoarthritis, they also have lameness oftentimes. That is true, and this is a little bit of a double dipping, but interestingly, the most common cause of lameness in this group here was navicular syndrome. All right, and then we have a full list of other medical conditions that we see in our senior horses. So PPID here stands for pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction. That's a hormonal disorder where the pars intermedia of the pituitary gland, which is kind of at the bottom of the brain, is enlarged and outputs large amounts of hormones, which cause a variety of clinical signs in our horses, most characteristically a shaggy, big hair coat and delayed shedding. And I sometimes say that these horses almost look like little teddy bears. And while that sounds really cute, they're actually not doing very well. So that is PPID. Then we have EMS here, equine metabolic syndrome. That's a medical condition. Also affects the hormonal system, where these horses have regional fat deposits and weight loss resistance, and also insulin dysregulation. And while by itself that doesn't sound terribly bad, these horses are actually predisposed to developing laminitis, which we know is not great. Okay, what I thought was cool about this table is that medical conditions such as tumors and cardiovascular diseases that we would usually see in elderly humans were not super common. They were less than 3% common. All right, so how about other countries in this context? The UK, again, did a similar survey study to ours, and they found also that osteoarthritis is the most common medical condition, but for them it only affected 8% of horses. So this could be because their study was conducted, I think, over 10 years ago, or because in the UK, the horses don't get osteoarthritis, or because there was an underdiagnosis. How about Australia? Well, here I see the Queensland itch as the most common medical condition, and then we have lameness, but osteoarthritis is not even listed in the top, say, 5. So that was very interesting as well. Again, the prevalence of these conditions seemed relatively low compared to what we saw in our study. And again, this could have something to do with underdiagnosis. All right, so we're coming back to our US senior horses now and our survey study, and we're looking at clinical signs. So here I grouped some clinical signs into a category of joint performance and hoofs, and we can see that stiff leg joints are really the most important clinical sign in our US senior horses. That makes sense because osteoarthritis is very common. Then in this group here, you see these are all related to body composition. We can see that low muscle mass is the most common clinical sign in this group here, followed by low body condition, low muscle tone, and then we're talking about high body condition. And overall, the low muscle mass is actually the second most common clinical sign in our US senior horses. So therefore, we're now taking a closer look at loss of muscle mass in senior horses. And I already mentioned on the last slide that this low muscle mass is pretty common. In fact, every 6th senior horse has low muscle mass according to their owners. And what we also learned is that there seems to be a relationship with age. So what this figure shows us here is the percent of horses with low muscle mass, and then plotted against horse age. And clearly there is a linear relationship between the two. And that's actually not super surprising because humans as well, in fact, all mammals seem to have an age-related loss of muscle mass. And in humans, that actually appears to start at an age of 30 years already, but it's a very slow pace of that muscle loss. But once somebody reaches an age of 60 years or older, that's when it starts to pick up and the muscle loss becomes more rapid. When we look at this graph here in horses, it appears like, there's a low frequency of horses with low muscle mass between 15 and 20 years, but then there is a fast increase in the rate of horses with low muscle mass. So that is again in line with our definition of physiological old age, which starts at 20. Now, an important question arises, which is muscle loss actually a big deal? I just shared that a lot of horses seem to be affected by this, but is it really something that we need to worry about? So the answer is it depends. We know that even minor loss of muscle mass can affect performance. But to understand this statement correctly, I want to give you an example. So say we have a high-level dressage horse that is doing a lot of piafs, pirouettes, and so on. If this horse is losing some muscle mass in the hind region, it will probably affect that horse's performance. Let's say we have a horse that we mainly use for pleasure riding, and that horse loses some muscle mass in the neck region. It will probably not affect the performance of that horse. But if we take that same horse and this horse now loses muscle mass in the back and hind region, and it loses a lot, then it will probably affect the performance even of this horse that we use for pleasure riding. So it really depends on the region where the muscle loss is occurring. It depends on the degree of muscle loss and the type of performance that we're asking of the horse. Let's say we have a horse that now has really low muscle mass. That can actually affect that horse's welfare. And that's so because it can affect a horse's ability to get up after laying down. So oftentimes I hear owners tell me, well, my horse doesn't even lay down anymore because he's afraid to get up. I don't think there's any scientific research on that yet, but it seems that these older horses are actually struggling to get up after laying down. Then it could affect their interactions with other horses. For example, they couldn't avoid a horse that's kicking or biting as quickly as a horse with normal muscle mass. And lastly, even the daily activities of walking around in the pasture can be affected. So with that in mind, I think it's important that we're monitoring our horses closely for any changes in muscle mass, and also that we understand what kinds of horses are at a heightened risk of developing this low muscle mass. And that's really what this slide is about, yet another risk factor analysis. So here we were looking at risk factors for low muscle mass, and we found that advancing age was an important risk factor. Again, not surprising, as we know that all mammals are losing muscle as they age. Then we found that geldings were at a heightened risk. So that could have something to do with testosterone, but I think more research needs to be done on that. And then there are a variety of medical conditions that are increasing the risk of low muscle mass, for example, osteoarthritis, laminitis, and PPID. So basically, if you have an older horse that's also a gelding and he has PPID, you know that he is at a super high risk of developing or even already having low muscle mass. But even if your horse is just advancing in age, you know that you need to keep monitoring because it's a risk factor for developing low muscle mass. All right, so how can we monitor changes in muscle mass in our horses? I know that there are many techniques out there, and some might say, well, I just look at my horse. But especially if you're looking at your horse daily, it's really difficult to see smaller changes in muscle mass. Then some others might use body condition scoring. So, for example, the Henneke body condition scoring system was developed specifically for fat mass assessment. So it's not actually a great idea to use that for muscle mass because it has a very different goal. But there are some systems out there that are looking at muscle mass, and one of them is the so-called muscle atrophy scoring system. Atrophy is just a different term for loss of muscle mass. And this is actually a technique that our team has developed. And if you are curious about the scientific article related to this, or if you want a full scientific muscle scoring system, then you can use this QR code down here to access the article. But I also wanted to give you a quick insight into how the system works. So overall, it's kind of similar to the body condition scoring system, but again, it's specific to muscle mass. So we are scoring with the system 3 regions, the neck, the back, and the hind. And each one of these regions is receiving a score from 1 to 4, where 1 is no atrophy and 4 is severe atrophy. And just to give you an example of how these horses would look like if they had no or severe atrophy, I brought you some pictures here. So we have no atrophy at the top where the muscles are really curving outwards. You can see that all around here, versus severe atrophy at the bottom where the muscles are all around curving inwards. The nice thing about the scoring system is that it allows you to differentiate between fat and muscle mass, which I believe it's the only muscle scoring system that is able to do that. I think the others cannot. So how does the system really work? When you start using the scoring system, you're asked a variety of questions, and they will guide you to either the so-called lean tables or the adipose tables for the horses with fat mass. And then you will read these different scoring categories that describe how the horse looks and also feels like if it falls into each one of these categories. And we have some drawings over here to also help you decide which score is most appropriate for your horse. All right, so say you use the muscle atrophy scoring system and you found your horse has muscle loss. What should you do? Well, first of all, consult a veterinarian because there's so many possible reasons for this loss of muscle mass, and your veterinarian can really help you pinpoint what the underlying cause is. Is it just aging, or is it something more serious like a PPID? It may also be time for your veterinarian to talk to you about quality of life of your horse, depending on how severe the muscle atrophy is. In addition to that, you can also consult an equine nutritionist who can help you ensure that your horse has an appropriate diet with sufficient protein, sufficient amino acids to support muscle growth. And you can also do strength exercises. So here I have some that are more or less scientifically proven, okay? So first we have the carrot stretches. So a study was conducted on these carrot stretches, and they looked at the size of muscle in the horse's back, and they found that the carrot stretches were actually able to increase the size of that muscle. But the caveat is that this muscle is by itself relatively small. So it's very important for stabilizing the horse's back. But if your horse has large amounts of muscle loss, these carrot stretches are probably not going to cut it. But if your horse is in okay condition, then even a retired horse could start doing these carrot stretches, which is why I really like them. Then there is gymnastic training. The study was also conducted on that. There was a combination with the carrot stretches, and they used gymnastics, for example, walking over raised ground poles or in tight circles around barrels. And they found similarly to that first study that the size of that particular small muscle was increased. Then more recently, we have the resistant bands. This study here looked at the effects on back muscle strength, basically. So the way they measured that is by the rotation of that horse's back. More rotation meant less stability, so less strength. And by the end of this resistant band training, these horses all had increased back strength. And lastly, this one is not really, as far as I know, there's no scientific study for this, but I think it will probably help, is the hill training. You can do that riding or long lining, whatever works for you and for your horse. I think that this can be very beneficial for the back and the hind. All right, so we're moving into our main takeaways. Here we have horses are considered to be old at 15 or 20 years, depending on the age definition that we use. Most of our US senior horses are used for pleasure riding or are fully retired, and we saw something similar in the UK and in Australia. We think that semi-retirement might actually provide health benefits over full retirement. But, and this is something that I didn't really talk about before, the exercise program for these horses should really be tailored to their abilities. So in the very beginning of this talk, I talked about how horses have reduced exercise capacity as they age. And then I also mentioned that many of them have medical conditions. So these two things together really make it difficult for us sometimes to come up with a good exercise program. And that's why we think it should be really tailored to each individual horse's abilities. Then we found that retired and female senior horses are at a heightened risk of not receiving sufficient preventive health care. We found that the majority of the senior horses are affected by medical conditions, at least in the United States. In fact, every 6th senior horse has low muscle mass. And this low muscle mass, we know, can affect performance and welfare. So you should monitor your horses routinely for changes in muscle mass. And if you do detect any changes in muscle mass, consult your veterinarian so that they can help you figure out what the cause is and also guide you to the correct treatment. All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm also here for more questions now, but if any questions come up later on, you can email me. And if you're just curious in general about senior horses and the latest research connected to senior horses, you could check out myseniorhorse.com. You can use this QR code to get to that webpage. They have a variety of resources for horse owners all about senior horses. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can take your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Herbst. Let's give her a huge virtual round of applause. That was wonderful. I loved hearing about all the data along with the practical side of things. So we do have some questions coming in. And the first one I might have missed as well. It might have been something you said. Someone asked, what is Queensland itch? I didn't catch that.
It's specific to it's very common in Australia. There are some other terms for this. Let me think up the other terms. Maybe the person knows them from the other terms.
I've not heard of it either, to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
So I was about to look it
a
up,
type
but I
of
was like, oh,
urtica.
maybe she has an easy answer.
It's from the mitts. They're biting the horses.
So it's like a Swedish. So it's
Yes,
caused by a bug?
that's the other term. You got it. The
Okay.
Swedish.
Got it. We knew if I got you talking, we'd be able to figure it out. So yes,
Yes.
do have a lot of common Swedish here. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So another question says, does neck atrophy in senior horses point towards spinal issues or could it be something else?
Oh, it could be this, it could be something else, it could be osteoarthritis of the neck, for example. That can also sometimes cause atrophy. It could be nerve damage. It could be a variety of things. If your horse was used to working a lot in a way that it had to have a certain head carriage and now is retired from that and no longer using these muscles. So I think there could be a variety of reasons for neck atrophy. I think it really depends on how it looks exactly, how rapidly it occurred, and if any all the other causes, potential causes can be excluded, especially for osteoarthritis of the neck. I would look into that. It could be also a reason.
Awesome. Good answer for that. Thank you. So this one asks, what guidance can you share for conditioning an older horse who has been out of work for a few months? It's a good one.
Yes, so for a few months, yeah, I think you can slowly bring him back into training. As I already mentioned, what I like to do in addition to doing nothing basically in the retired horses are the carrot stretches. I find them very great, especially if your horse was not in work like for a shorter period of time. I think you can bring him back slowly. It depends on why you might have taken him out of work, you know. So, in consultation with your veterinarian, start up the work slowly and in line with the reason for why you had to take him out of work in the first place. But on top of that, you could do the carrot stretches, which are really relatively easy to do for most horses. Of course, be careful again with horses that have some osteoarthritis, for example, in the neck. They may not be able to do some of these extreme bends that we saw in the picture earlier. But you can try, in my opinion, any of the techniques that I showed you, but also just bring your horse back into work like you would with a younger horse.
Awesome. Yeah, great recommendations. So someone asked about breed and conformation. Are these taken into consideration for muscle atrophy scoring as well?
The scoring system that we had developed, we tried to use a broad range of breeds for that exact purpose. And I know that the saddlebreds come to mind in this context, that just have, especially in the back, a very different conformation where sometimes we might think, well, they don't have muscle in their back, but they actually do. So we did include saddlebreds in the development of our scoring system just to be sure that we're not making any misassumptions due to conformation of the horses. Um, Yet we're currently testing our scoring system even further and in other horse breeds so that eventually we can really say it's broadly applicable. It applies to all the breeds.
Good answer. So, have you explored the paddock track system to increase exercise? So, I know I will say on the first day when we talked about pasture management, we did talk a bit about the track system, and I know it's not used a whole lot. We haven't had a whole lot of research here in the U.S., but do you have any
Yeah.
experience with that?
So unfortunately, no, although it's super common these days in Germany where I'm from. So I think that there are some thoughts that the horses might actually not use it as intended, potentially sometimes, but I don't know how much it would actually increase muscle mass and how helpful it would be. Yeah, I guess it also depends on how exactly your track looks like. If there's a lot of hill work involved, it might actually be very helpful.
Yeah, agreed. Um, so this one's a bit of a long one. I'm not going to summarize. I'm gonna read it. So when
Mm.
starting a senior horse with muscle loss but no PPID on a new exercise program and with groundwork, how do you know when he's ready to advance to riding? Is there a goal for regaining a certain amount of muscle mass before riding?
Oh, this is a tough one. So, yeah, this is hard to tell. I really am afraid I'm not going to give you a good answer here. So, you know, you could, for example, use our muscle atrophy scoring system. That system was developed specifically to identify clinical muscle loss. So I would say if your horse has reached a score of 1, he's definitely good to go back into riding. Before that, yeah, it could be more or less good. could contribute to joint problems and so on if we're overworking the horse when it's not ready yet. So it's a very good question and a very good thought, but it's very individual to the horse. So it would be best to like see the animal and then make a decision from there.
Excellent. So I know we've talked about this, you and I together a little bit, but I'm going to ask you, and I can also kind of help chime in too. But the question is about nutrition and the role of nutrition with muscle mass. And what about protein? Do they need extra protein? And what do we recommend there?
If I don't misremember, we were talking about high quality proteins such as supplements for amino acids specifically. I believe that the branched chain amino acids are the good ones. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So, that definitely the good answer is it's not all about levels or amounts of total protein or what we call crude protein. It's more about the quality of protein and amino acids in it. So you want higher levels of the lysine, the threonine, and methionine is the third one. So there are some companies out there that have made these like a top line sort of supplements, which are high quality proteins. You could also get amino acid supplements, which aren't cheap. Amino acids are very expensive, but yeah, I would look more into doing, higher quality protein. But then you also have to watch from the metabolic horse side. There's been some thoughts that, protein might actually have an effect on insulin as well. So working with a nutritionist is probably a good idea. All right, winding down, we have one more. And another one just popped up. So first, are there any blood tests to measure inflammation levels in horses?
Inflammation levels. So this is another one of my favorite topics. There are blood tests, and it really depends on what type of inflammation you're interested in and the way this is coming up in what context. So we know, for example, that horses, like elderly humans, they can develop a condition that is called inflammaging. And this inflammaging we can see both in vivo and in vitro, for example, by measuring certain blood components, for example, CRP, or then so-called cytokines. These are little signaling molecules that communicate in the immune system, but also with other systems of the body. And we can measure those scientifically also, and we found that horses are experiencing, some horses at least, this inflammaging. The question is, at what stage is it becoming a problem? Does it contribute to the development of some medical conditions? Could it shorten a horse's life? We just really don't understand a whole lot about this inflammaging right now in terms of how it really affects the horse. We see that horses have it just like humans, but what does it mean?
Great answer. Awesome. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and give Dr. Herbst a huge round of applause. Thank you again for all of your time today. I think we covered most of the questions. I see a couple more coming in, but I can also help answer them along the way if you want to hang out for a little bit. But if you do have any last minute questions, go ahead. But we're going to go ahead and move on. And I'm going to invite Dr. Kris Hiney to go ahead and show us her camera and go ahead and share her slides. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Kris Hiney. So as I mentioned, she was one of our panelists and speakers last year. So I've asked Kyle to go ahead and post last year's horse management seminar videos in the chat. She was on day 2 and talked about evaluating pain. And she mentioned she has a talk on evaluating pain while riding, so she invited herself to speak for us today on evaluating pain while riding your horse, and also talking about the difference between pain and misbehaviors. So Dr. Kris Hiney is an associate professor of equine and an equine extension specialist at Oklahoma State University. She's got a PhD in animal science from Michigan State. Dr. Hiney has a dedicated career to equine nutrition, reproduction health, and management. She's very passionate about promoting the welfare of show horses and has developed an educational materials for both youth and adult audiences. Dr. Hiney also has interest in canine nutrition behavior, and she actively participates in dog training and agility. So welcome again, Dr. Hiney. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and let you take over.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I'm excited to be back talking to everybody. So maybe there's some returning people from last year. or if you missed it, make sure you check out that recording. So we're not going to get as deep into assessing pain as we did in the previous lecture, but certainly we're going to talk about it. So we're going to start out, and there's a reason that I put the question mark after my title, because oftentimes what we describe as misbehavior in the horse is probably coming from a lot of other reasons. So I love this quote, and it's a beautiful picture of that horse. But hopefully everybody here on this webinar is a horse enthusiast, and we all agree and believe that horses are these unique, amazing animals, and yet they put up with so much that we do to them. And often we're actually doing them an injustice if we don't recognize when they're uncomfortable, and if we're only really thinking about our own agenda. So the part that I'm doing tonight with you guys is actually a piece or a component of an online course that we created with my team here. And so we have created this course, Recognizing Affective States in Equine. And everybody on this team, so Amber Wells is the top of the screen. She was my graduate assistant that did this project. And then also Dr. Colleen Brady at Purdue University, and then Dr. Kathy Anderson. So we all have a passion for improving the lives of our show horses. So just to provide a little bit of background, so you guys don't think that I haven't done horses, I've done many, many years of education. I began my background in 4-H. I've spent time as an exercise rider for track horses. I've been a track groom. I've rode and trained my own reining horses, was an NRHA judge, served in welfare committees, and have taught a lot of horsemanship to youth and adult audiences over the years. So I have a pretty extensive background, again, on the horse side. But as Carrie said, and you're like, why are there dogs here? So now I actually do this. So this is my main passion and hobby in life. I actually don't do horse competitions anymore. Part of that is I found this sport that my partner loves. My dog drags me into the ring to compete with me and loves playing the game. So it provides a completely different perspective when you're competing with animals that really, really enjoy this. Also, the dogs have really made me pay attention to the emotions of the animal, because you can train them all you want, but if their emotions are overwhelming to them or put them in conflict, they can't perform. And so the other beauty of this is when you are hands-free, you cannot force this animal to do anything. So they've really taught me to be so much more cognizant over the environment and what it's doing to the emotional health of the animal. So normally, and we can kind of play along a little bit. I like to have people kind of to chat, so you can type into the chat what kind of things that you may define as sort of misbehavior in the ridden horse. So we'll do this super quick. So if you guys want to just maybe jot some things really, really fast into the chat over what you may define as what is misbehavior in the horse. So not the Q&A, but just kind of what counts as misbehavior. So I see rearing. I've got one brave person. Only one brave person. Grittiness. I don't know that I would call that. Bucking, kicking, bucking. Okay, so there we go. Head shaking, head shy, biting, all of those. So yeah, that's what a lot of people think about as misbehavior in the horse. And later on, we're going to put those into context. And most of the time, what we're actually looking at are conflict behaviors. And so we'll talk about those more as we go. So I love talking about affective state in horses and really getting people to think about this. And the study of affective state, which is essentially the emotional state of the horse, is just exploding. There's lots and lots of research on that. And so really good horse management requires us to pay attention to the mind of the horse. And so this image that I have here is actually an image of what the 5 domains model is. And so this is the new way to assess animal well-being. The 5 freedoms was mostly about like, let's not have anything bad. But this really focuses in on the mental health of the horse and really emphasizes also that the animal can experience positive things as well. And also how all of these relationships all feed directly into the mental health of the horse, which is a lot of what we're talking about today. Um, so I like to kind of maybe even put perspectives here. So I'm sure many people have been or taught or that maybe had conflict about whether horses have human emotions. And I think we've definitely proved that animals, as well as horses, do possess the same emotions. Their brains light up in the same way in the kind of similar circumstances. And so the idea that horses really don't have emotions, thankfully, is going away. I'll actually jump back to this one. So this was actually a fun little study where they were actually trying to decide between the facial expressions of horses that were either disappointed or frustrated. So that's the level at which we're really trying to communicate and understand our horses so that we can see what they're doing and then ascribe some of those emotions to them. So I like to kind of bring up, because people have really been taught, don't anthropomorphize, don't anthropomorphize. And I don't think there's anything wrong in using the same language, right? Because we have to have language to describe emotions. And so, yes, of course, we're going to use some of the same words to describe the emotional state of our horse. But what is wrong, what we should not do in anthropomorphizing, is placing our emotions onto the horse. Okay, so we have to see that animal as its own individual and value and respect its emotions and its emotional health, and not put our thoughts and feelings onto them, right? So the kind of the classic example is, if I'm cold, they're cold. That's not really true, right? So thermoregulation tells us something else. And so it is our job as people that own and interact with horses to really investigate and think about, why is the animal acting that way? What are these signs that they're showing me? And make sure that I do the right management decisions. So why do emotions matter? We're going to describe this a little bit more scientifically here. And so we describe emotions as either positive or negative valence. So valence really just means the goodness or badness of an emotion, right? So if you can see the words here on the right side, these are all what we call positive valence. The horse is delighted, happy, excited, content, relaxed. These are all connotations of good things. And then negative valence, we don't want our horses here in the negative valence, right? So a lot, again, of that 5 freedoms was talking about avoiding negative valence, these negative emotions. Of course, we want to avoid negative emotions, but we also want the horse to have the opportunity to experience things on the right side of this graph, and that's those positive emotions as well. The other piece of this, and this can get a little confusing too, because I don't think we've got a great way to measure, define arousal, but that just really refers to the intensity of the emotion, which again is really hard to interpret. So overall, we don't want animals to stay in high arousal, negative valence very long, but often we miss this quadrant down here, these depressed, bored, tired horses, this low arousal, as well as negative valence. We're going to get back to arousal in a few slides, because that's also going to be very important to when we're talking about misbehavior in the horse. So I've actually used this slide in my other talk about pain, but chronic pain as well as chronic anxiety really has functions. It impairs the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrinology system, as well as the limbic system. And I think what we really have to think about is that if that animal is in either chronic anxiety or chronic pain, add that back in, if it affects the limbic system, it's going to affect their behavioral and emotional response. I mean, we can all put ourselves in the horse's shoes, right? If I have a headache, am I going to be as patient and tolerant with my class that as I am if I'm actually feeling good? Or if we're anxious, do we not snap at other people or act differently? So how is our horse any different? And so expecting them to be these well-behaved machines at all times when they may be experiencing anxiety or pain is really not fair for them. So we really want to think about, yes, these have biological effects on the horse. So I said there we kind of touch back on arousal again. So the Yerkes-Dodson law essentially says there is an optimal level of arousal at which we can perform, and also which animals can perform. So if we have an animal that is in too high of a state of arousal, which guess what, anxiety leads to too high of a level of arousal, it decreases performance. Okay, so even in horses that we want them to do maybe fast, exciting performance, if their anxiety is too high, they are not going to be at that optimal level. And so we have to figure out how to rack down that arousal until that animal can reach kind of that optimal performance level. On the too low, maybe we don't have boredom. We may have some learned helplessness here, but often in the horse industry, we often see that this low arousal sometimes is artificially created. And if you think that artificially creating low arousal does not affect performance, I think you really don't understand biology and again, how all of these things function together. So another important thing to think about. I like to bring my dogs in quite a bit. And again, I have learned a lot by running agility dogs to really understand how emotions impact dogs. So this is my tale of when we say animals know what they're supposed to do, right? They know what they're supposed to do. Why aren't they doing it at the horse show? They're just trying to get even with me or embarrass me. No. So in dog agility, weave pulls are actually really hard. It is the hardest obstacle for them to do. They have to have footwork. They have to know which pole to enter on. They have you doing crazy things, and the dog still has to do these 12 pulls on their own. So this dog here, Torque, is a dog that is very emotionally sensitive. He is very sensitive to his environment. If he has been crated next to a kind of angry dog, if he is too close to the crowd where they can see him, if he had some bad experiences on the way to the ring, he won't weave. Even though he's well trained, we spend a lot of time doing this. If his emotional state is such that he has any nervousness of anxiety that is fed into him that day, this dog actually can't perform weave pulls. Now, this other dog on the right side, this is Avi. So he's one of my border collies. This dog has tons of drive to do the sport. And so for him, he also sometimes doesn't weave at trials, but for him, if he doesn't do it, it's usually pain. And so even though this dog will still weave at home, when he's in that higher arousal state, higher anxiety, being in that trial environment, that's when, again, these things creep up. And so for me, really recognizing this dog and his emotional health, I know the minute he doesn't weave, there's something wrong with him. And off we go to the veterinarian, the chiropractor, massage therapist, all the other things I spend my money on. So we'll go back to the horses. So we want to think about points to consider for horse misbehavior. So we're going to go through each one of these, the affective state of the horse, the environment. We're going to talk about people as well. And then we're also going to obviously talk about pain, which is kind of the main focus a little bit of what we're talking about tonight and relative to what I talked about last year. So I found this study, this was actually a great graph to me because on this side, this is hyperactive behavior. Okay, so this is essentially the incidence or occurrence of horses performing hyperactive behavior. And this was a survey. So people didn't know that they were being perceived to providing poor welfare. But they took up essentially the score where they answered a bunch of questions about how the horses were housed and different things relative to impact on welfare. And what you can see is as the horse's welfare score went up, look at how the number of hyperreactive behaviors dropped. I think this is a really important graph to think about, that these bad behaviors that we're calling misbehavior in the horse can actually be telling us there's something not right with the management of the horse. So I love that study is really a very nice holistic look at the horse's entire life. So let's talk about environment. And I spend, or we focus, myself and my colleagues, a lot on the show horse welfare, because a lot of the competition horses really can suffer kind of from some of our expectations and what we're asking from them, and all of the different things that we ask horses to do. So one of the first things to think about is just even isolation. A lot of our competition horses, because we want them to have beautiful hair coats and never get injured, live in isolation. And we know that isolation is considered stressful for horses. So if they only have access to that little box style environment, super stressful for those horses. Even for me, kind of thinking about my 4-Hers here in Oklahoma, a lot of our 4-H horses live outside. They have great life. They live in pastures. But then when they have to come to our district or state shows, they have to be stalled. Extremely stressful for those horses. So now can you imagine you have a nervous little kid and a horse that is completely anxious and stressed out by this new environment and isolation that we put them. So now we're just kind of compounding all sorts of levels of stress and anxiety into these youth horses. The other part, the flip side of this, horses are herd animals. But when they go to these show environments, maybe they're stalled next to another horse that really doesn't like them, that kind of have some agonistic behaviors going along. I mean, if we think about what do horses do when they normally meet each other in a pasture, it's not normally just, hey, you're immediately my friend. There's all of these social dynamics that happen. So now we have horses in close proximity to new horses. You don't know what communication signals maybe this horse is sending to this one that can make them uncomfortable standing next to that horse in that lineup or going past them in an arena. So there's a lot of social dynamics that actually can be kind of stressing our horses out a little bit. The other part of that, again, going to horse shows, there's a lot of times the horse has to work individually. So now we're asking them to go out into the arena all by themselves. And if they don't feel comfortable, they're going to be extremely anxious and nervous because, again, of that isolation factor. The other piece of that, there's a lot of stimuli at horse shows, right? So over arousal, too much sensory input also really creates a lot of stress behaviors, can create hyperactivity, these big exuberant behaviors that we're going to blame on, oh, you're acting out, when essentially it's just too much. If you can, again, put yourself in their shoes, so to speak, and think about if all of that energy was coming at you, all of that different stimuli, how are you going to feel? And so horses really have to be trained thoughtfully to be able to go through all of that stress. And then just think about all the changes of routine, in feeding, in turnout, all of these things, in sleep schedules, travel, all of these things can really, really ramp up the stress and anxiety on those horses. That also, remember, decreases the threshold of pain. So extra stress can make pain more amplified or, again, decrease the threshold. Again, probably what happens with Avi when he feels a little uncomfortable in those weave pulls. So lots of things to think about when we're considering the environment and how it impacts that horse's behavior. So we're going to talk about people because obviously people are a huge part about horse misbehavior. And so we want to talk about what's going on with humans that may be contributing to these issues. So let's kind of go through these a little bit one at a time. So one kind of fun thing, and there's studies to prove this, horses actually do read human emotions. There was a fun study where horses were actually more willing to approach a person that they saw in a picture, in a photograph that had a happy face, compared to pictures of people that were angry and they didn't want to go meet those people. Horses also have higher heart rates around people with negative emotions. So everything that we are feeling, that horse can pick up on that. And then again, I have a soft spot for my competitive horses. Think about, do human emotions change at events? Absolutely, right? And so now I have an anxious, stressed person, and we don't think that those emotions and tension don't bleed over to that horse and create kind of some of these misbehaviors. So I really think we have to put the onus on ourselves a little bit and think about where are these misbehaviors actually coming from. So I like to kind of think about too how our attitudes and abilities impact the horse. So this is just a list of human attitudes that actually can create a lot of these behaviors that we don't want. So we can think about people that are tentative, fearful, but then there's the other side, right? So they're impatient, too quick to correct the horse, maybe not paying attention to that the horse is actually anxious or uncomfortable, or individuals that are just not even care about the emotional state of those horses. And so what does that create? That creates reactive horses, ones that don't want to be around people. So ones that have a longer flight distance or want to move away. Horses that are going to be non-compliant, reactive horses, hypervigilant horses. Again, all of these, what we call our kind of misbehaviors in horses, may be coming from the attitude at which we approach that horse interaction. So if we flip it to the positive, if we can be actually interact with the horses with some confidence, with some sensitivity and paying attention to them and being clear on what we're doing, approaching them with patience, kindness, and empathy. I always think, man, if we can just increase the amount of empathy that people have for horses and others, we can do a lot. And these emotions then can create these horses that are more calm and relaxed, that actually seek human contact, that are more exploratory or curious in their behaviors and mannerisms instead of thinking so negatively or pessimistically, and horses that are more willing and more responsive because they've been treated with the attitude that leads to that responsive individual. So the other piece that goes into it too on the misbehavior in horses is our human ability or capability. So I'll be honest, this is a hard sport, right? Riding horses is a hard sport. A lot of people aren't good at it, right? Especially when we're first starting out. So oftentimes we may actually be causing unintentional pain or harm. Think about the tough job that school horses have. I actually just read a paper recently where they were talking about the affective state in a lot of school horses, and it was actually apathy and helplessness. Like, oh, how sad that is that eventually becomes their lives. So a lot of what we ask horses to do, sometimes they actually have to tune out and be non-responsive, essentially, to cope. So what kind of handling do we not want to see? Erratic, rough, excessively forceful. Again, I like to kind of bringing up punishment focused. I always, when I talk about this in training, there is an unending list of what you can do wrong, but there's one answer to what you can do right. And if we don't focus on recognizing what is right and only focus on punishment, again, that can lead to lots of anxiety, fear, that helplessness that I talked about. If we're using this excessively forceful or more pressure than needed, pain. I mean, pain is a real thing that we actually can cause pain in our horses when we're using too much force and pressure. So all of these create these behaviors that will result in the misbehavior in the horse. So super, super important. So what if we want in handling? Skillful would be great, but gentle and again, reward focused. Focus on what the animal should be doing, not so much on what they shouldn't be doing. It doesn't mean that you're not firm, right? But that you use some restraint when you're working with them. And our goal is more subtle communication. So all of that is what can lead to a horse that's calm, confident, at ease around people, and actually enjoys being around people. So we can't all be born as wonderful, experienced riders. But if you recognize, one, and I always think people really need to be conscious, look at what effect you are having on that horse. If your horse interacts or acts differently when you ride it versus somebody else, that should tell you something. So if the behavior is worse with you, that means you need to take that message internally, that you need to strive to improve. So really, really focus on what impact do our actions have on that affective state of that horse is super important. So I've got a picture here that you guys can weigh in a little bit. So this is going to be a little the chance to be interactive. So just take a quick gander at this one, and then you guys can drop just some thoughts there into the chat. So I'm going to pull up my Okay, so I've got an ouch. So people are, okay, avoidance, pain. Would a lot of people label this horse as misbehaving? Ill-fitting tack? Yes, right? So when I look at this picture, right, so I'm looking at the affect of the horse. Is the rider inexperienced? Everything about this image says yes, that he's inexperienced. He's balancing himself on the reins, no ability to stabilize himself. The tack fits badly. And so what do we see is a horse that what we would describe as he's fighting the bit, he's elevating his head, all these things that we call misbehavior. Even look at the expression on them. This horse, what else would you ask him to do? So again, so much of this misbehavior in horse and the horse communication is just not read, right? So this is caused by the human. And so we want to recognize that that we need to change this picture, right? And not, again, blame the horse for the undesirable actions that he may be doing. It's a tough job being kind of these trail horses. Okay, so let's talk then even in the ridden horse, and because that was kind of our topic of conversation tonight, is that in the ridden horse, there is also a lot of disagreement on the expression of behaviors in the ridden horse because various disciplines require more or less flexion or a static head position, how they use their tail. All of these things can be different between kind of disciplines and the culture that you're in. And so, you know, while one person may say this horse is upheaded and so that is misbehaving, maybe this is not what this rider is going for. And so even how horse misbehavior is interpreted differs according to the expectations of what we have in those horses. So again, something as simple as should they be flexed at the pole, in front of the vertical, behind the vertical, that is interpreted so differently as good or bad behavior depending on horse disciplines. So are they more or less resistant, willing, or compliant? Or are they just trained to carry their head there? So all of those, your background can actually influence how you're viewing kind of horse behavior. So I've got a little video here to play. Oops, hang on. I forgot to hit the optimize share. So Carrie, sorry about this. I'm going to stop and then jump it right back on. Oops. That was my bad. Okay. And we will have
at Harbor Freight. Building your dream career is a reality, not a possibility. Here, you will.
So we're just going to watch this because my point on what some people decide is disobedient or not disobedient is kind of cultural. So we're just going to watch this a little bit, let you guys think about what you see, what you think about the affect. Would people consider this as misbehavior, not misbehavior? What all is going on just in this little short video? And you can start dropping things in the chat and then we'll talk about it a little bit. It's always more fun if you're in a live room, but if you guys want to just drop some things in the chat, what you're seeing. Oh, keep going while you guys are chatting. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. And so I'm kind of seeing some differences of opinion a little bit. It comes to your background here. So this is desirable for Arabian halter horses to have this super high arousal, big white sclera. There's a lot going in that we probably don't have time to get through all of this. But in a lot of people's circles, this is the last thing that you would ever want to see, right? And so you don't want to see horses flinging their head around, doing all this running around the handler. But in that culture that is actually what they're going for and expectations. So again, what counts as misbehavior in the horse can be a little bit about what is going on. Now, there's a whole lot else that we can unpack there, but I just wanted to bring that point out about it's a little bit of that cultural difference. So hopefully everybody can, so rearing, here's some rearing for you. So a lot of overt signs of misbehavior in horses are often actually masked. So things such as teeth grinding, opening the mouth, wringing the tail, or more obvious signs of agitation or frustration of the horse. All of these can be altered by training styles, equipment, and even pharmacological methods. So often these signs that horses are extremely uncomfortable, frustrated, anxious, we just make sure that they go away. And so we're trying to get you to recognize that these really are impactful for that horse's well-being. Otherwise, the other part of this too is hard to sometimes decide, is it arousal or is it anxiety? Because yes, an animal can be excited and aroused, and that can look very, very similar to fear and anxiety there. So a lot of times I hear people will say, well, he's just really excited to go perform. Is he, or is he really, really anxious? And ultimately doesn't matter, because behavior can't improve in the face of either high arousal or high anxiety. And so we have to address these underlying emotions and tamp down whether it is arousal or anxiety, because neither one is going to be good for the horse long term. Talking about, again, some of these misbehaviors, the hyperactivity in horses, this actually can be learned behavior. And so the past experience of that horse can actually create hyperactive animals. So not all training processes are good, and a lot of them create confusion, pain, conflict. Told to go and stop at the same time, all of those can create these excitable horses due to these really conflicting messages that they've received. And we actually know, we have data on horses about what do they consider stressful, right? So we have some behaviors and some practices that have been linked to physiological changes. So we know that eye temperature increases during stress. Well, guess what? When horses are lunged in training aids, ridden behind the vertical for a prolonged period of time, eye temperature increases. So we do know with data, with science, what training practices actually are considered stressful for horses. So we need to kind of embrace that a little bit more. I'm going to try to, maybe I'll speed past this one a little bit. So I know Dr. Williams, you've seen this video. If we have time for it, we'll come back to it. So we'll try to keep going forward in light of making sure we stay on time. Because I want to make sure that we're talking about pain, right? So that's the focus of this lecture. So pain can be extraordinary cyclical. So if we have somebody that has a horse that says they have a lack of willingness, or they're stubborn, or they're resistant, those horses are going to be punished. Typically, it's going to lead to harsher training techniques. And so then we also have continuing this cycle because we're feeding into pain. So a lot of what ends up being described as lack of willingness, stubbornness, or resistance may be from pain. And if we're using punishment and harsh training techniques to fix it, we're just exacerbating the problem. And so we really want to make sure that people recognize more subtle signs of pain and address them, rather than kind of pushing through with incorrect or aversive training techniques. So lameness, so and my point of doing this lecture too is, I think every horseman hopefully has been trained to recognize, okay, a lame horse, right? So a lot of times when we think about pain in the horse, we say, well, are they lame or not? But is that all there is? And is everybody equally good at even recognizing pain? So I think it's very important when we watch horses that we get used to recognizing what behavior we see, what's normal, and what's abnormal. So in this little clip of that horse there, I'm just going to do the same thing. If you guys want to chat, any thoughts about this little horse there, the little bay horse on the lunge line? So I have an UGG. Okay, so limping, lame. Okay, so lots of people have seen this horse being lame, but I will tell you what, a lot of people miss this because the horse looks calm, he looks relaxed, he's slow, he's doing what we want the horse to do, and so this is not universally recognized. Now, as he goes on, he'll actually get a little worse for the purpose of this video. But a lot of people miss that this is actually a horse that's just being quiet and calm. And because he doesn't look kind of crazy or painful, that they're not catching a lot of what we're looking at there. So really, really important to really see that whole picture of that horse. So these are just a list of kind of common misbehaviors in horses, things that are going to be labeled as the horse is doing the wrong thing and he's misbehaving. So a horse while being ridden, if they lay their ears back, if their tongue comes out, if they open their mouth against the bit, if their eyes are up above the bit, like the previous picture of that horse. Head tossing, tail ringing, horse doesn't want to go forward, or opposite, they're hurrying, they're a little fast on their feet. The horse is changing gait, changing lead, being in the wrong lead. All of these can be like, I've got to fix this and address this. But all of these can actually be due to pain, right? So this horse, and we can't know in this still image, but there's definitely this horse, I would say, is extremely anxious, conflict behavior, frightened, or he's painful. Which one is it? I don't know. We have to watch a little bit more than a still image. But I'm certainly not going to put the blame on this horse for whatever action is happening because he is in a panic mode at that point in time. So I've got another horse. I like to have pictures for people to take a look at. So let's type in some thoughts about my horse. Little horse here. Any thoughts on this horse? Okay, so the horse is bad hands. Okay, so there we go. Nostrils flared, eyes white, head is above the bit, trying what people would say is he's evading the bit, right? So I will tell you, in a lot of places, this is going to be met with more spurs and harsher hands, right? And so if we don't recognize that this can be coming from all those other emotions, right? Fear, anxiety, frustration, pain, and all it's going to be met with is harsher punishment, again, then this cycle is just going to continue. So my goal is to take a step back and think about why is the horse doing this, right? Rather than just forcing a different posture in the horse. So I found this paper and I thought this was kind of a fun one just to kind of talk about how sometimes we really miss some of the subtle things. So this was a paper that was looking at range of motion in the back of reining horses. And so kind of the big highlight point, and I kind of wrote here what the results were, that essentially the more asymmetrical the horse's movement was, there was decreased range of motion in the back. And then essentially, if there was less range of motion from the neck to the tail, there was more asymmetry in the front, less lateral motion, there was more asymmetry in the hind legs. But the group of horses that this paper focused on, these were all horses that had no reported history of back pain. They had no performance issues, and they were considered sound. Yet once they actually put the measuring devices on them, then we could actually see, you know what, there is asymmetry. So maybe these horses are a little off. And so I just think about, my experiences, less lateral range of motion. How is this going to be met? The horse that is stiff and unwilling to move the rib over, or unwilling to be supple through the back or the head and neck, But ultimately, if that's coming from, I have asymmetrical movement, that horse most likely is uncomfortable and not resistant. There's underlying discomfort in that animal that, again, harsher training aids are not going to fix. That's just going to compound the problem and create more pain. So this is Dr. Sue Dyson, and she did definitely assist us with our RAISE course and provided some videos, and so we referenced her paper here. But this is a wonderful paper that she created, this ridden horse pain ethogram. And essentially, these are a list of 24 behaviors that are more commonly seen in horses with pain. So essentially, they did a lot of lameness evaluations, a lot of blocking of lameness, and isolated the behaviors that they found were showing up 10 times more likely in the lame horse. So if you see one thing once, then it most likely is probably behavior. But if you see these behaviors over and over, and again, kind of her criteria was if they saw 8 or more of these behaviors in 5 minutes, it's pain, right? And so we need to think a little bit more clearly about what's actually happening here. So in the head, so we'll go through a number of these and just kind of talk about these. So in the head, horses that repeatedly change the position of the head. So if we think about those horses that aren't comfortable in front or behind the vertical, so they're are always kind of moving their head, tilting the head to one side, tossing it, or if the horse is always having to be corrected, those can be indicators of pain. And again, so often that's the horse that's resistant, unwilling, a bigger bit, a different sort of cavesson. So all of those things can really be masking or hiding that the horse is actually feeling pain. So this one, I isolated a picture here, head tossing. So head tossing often gets kind of blamed on trigeminal nerve pain. But in reality, that most often head tossing actually comes down to musculoskeletal pain. And so try to recognize that these behaviors can indicate something else is uncomfortable in that horse's body, and then try to track that down. Okay, so important to think about. Facial expressions, our RAISE course is really big on facial expressions. And so looking at ears that are back or flat, that's an uncomfortable horse. If they're holding the eyelids closed or half closed, the big wide sclera, if the animal is opening or shutting the mouth, or if the tongue is exposed or moving in and out of the mouth, those again can be indicators of pain. Can they also be our other conflict behaviors? Of course, but we want to recognize that these may actually be the animal telling you, I am uncomfortable. But unfortunately, there's often a solution to horses that are opening or shutting the mouth or ill with the ears. So whether it's a legal pharmaceutical application or restrictive nose bands that don't allow the animal to express those behaviors, we often just mask that, and that's doing a very big disservice for the horse. Tails can also tell us a lot about whether the horse is uncomfortable. So tails that are held clamped to the middle or kind of held to the side of the body, but this is probably the larger one that people may see. So horses that are, ringing the tail like this one here is, repeatedly moving that tail up and down, side to side. So any of those excessive motions can indicate that that animal is actually uncomfortable. Can it also be frustration, anxiety? Of course, but missing this as pain is a huge mistake that people often overlook. But unfortunately, there's a solution for that as well, right? So again, within the horse industry, we often do things that just mask that horse's affective state and actually take away their ability to communicate pain to us. And so maybe thinking twice about some of these practices and what they're ultimately doing to the animal should be more on our radar. Gait in the horse. So again, a lot of this is going to be, people will say this is a training issue, right? So a horse that's a little quick on his feet or has an irregular gait, too slow, he's going to be spurred, right? Or excessive leg. Horses that aren't tracking on the same line. This one, horses, not gait, gait like real. Spontaneous changes in the horse's gait so that they're breaking from a canter or a lope. That can tell you that they're not comfortable. And so again, people will think about this as a training issue, but kind of miss that they're really, they don't feel very good. Horses don't typically always take the wrong lead. If your horse can't take the correct lead, there's probably something there that they're uncomfortable. And you need to look a little bit deeper and think about that. So these are big red flags. If horses are falling out of lead, can't keep a lead, I would really, really look to musculoskeletal problems and not so much just training. Even stumbling and tripping, again, indicators of pain, disease state. So very important to not just, again, say it's a lack of training or the horse is clumsy, because it can actually be an indicator of pain. Some other ones, horses that change direction suddenly, reluctance to go forward, and then our classic ones that we started with at the very beginning of this lecture, horses that are rearing, bucking, kicking, all of those can actually be from pain. And how many times are horses actually severely punished for demonstrating these behaviors when they may, again, whether it's conflict, fear, frustration, anxiety, or pain, all of those need us to take a step back and think about why might the animal be acting like this, and do a better job of trying to solve that problem for them. So Dr. Williams, I don't know that we have time to watch the horses videos, but I think we're at the point where we should be entertaining questions. Is that correct?
You do have a little bit more time if you want to keep going. Right now, I do only have one question, so I encourage those of you who do have questions to start asking questions. But why don't we go for about another 5 minutes, and then we can entertain questions.
I'll just start with this video.
Can you turn off the volume, Kris?
Yes. You don't want to hear him crunching around.
I think the wind was very loud.
Yeah. So this was a video that was given to us, or Dr. Dyson let us use this in our course. So this was to allow you guys an opportunity to kind of watch a horse and think about what you see. Okay, so this horse was presented for some lameness evaluations. When she originally sent me this video, I was very confused, I'll be honest. Yeah, so I did ask her, I was like, is this a gaited horse? No, it was not a gaited horse, because I was very confused. And so this horse having trouble changing from one gait to the other. Now there's a lot else going on, but that should be, again, a dead giveaway, and not like, oh, this is a training issue. I'll just play him really quick again so you guys can watch that. And then we'll jump down to the next video. But I definitely was like, what kind of horse is this? So this is not a gaited horse, but that is how uncomfortable this horse was in trying to come back down from canter to trot. And he just couldn't. He was so uncomfortable doing that. So I've got one more video for you guys to watch. And so in this video, from the list, and we went through it really quick, right? So sorry, probably didn't have time to soak this in. But of the list of all of these behaviors that are associated with pain, you're going to watch this horse and see what you can pick out. There you go, volume down. Oh, sorry. Every time I hit my chat button, it makes it go away. Come on, keep going. This is the fun of you be the vet. Try to see those ridden horse pain ethogram signs. Okay, I like Gretchen's answer.
Just don't forget, Kris, that nobody else other than us can see the chat. So if you want them to know what it said, you'll have to read.
Oh, Gretchen said, not tracking in the same tracks, head high and fighting the bit, variable speeds. So what you guys should be seeing, that the ears are held back, the head is above the vertical and a head tilt. So you'll often see that the rider is pulling more to the right. If you said he was trotting on 3 tracks, that would also be an answer of what was in here. If you talked about the eyes of the horse, intense steer of the horse, that would count. What didn't really count, so he took the wrong lead, but that didn't count in our, you have to see it more than one time. Sometimes it's just the wrong lead. There were other small signs, mouth open, but not for more than 10 seconds. He did stumble once. So there were lots of things that were going on here. And so if you'd like the answer over why the horse was lame, he has bilateral hind limb lameness. So if anybody was thinking it's the hind limb, but it was both hind limbs that were painful in this horse. So kind of to wrap up on what do I really want you to think about when you're going forward and working with horses and labeling ridden behaviors as misbehavior. One, ask yourself, is it a conflict behavior? You know, does the horse just not understand, right? Are they green, or are they anxious and frustrated? Are their emotions such that they can't really do anything else? Is it a complete misunderstanding between rider skill and the horse, right? So there's often that miscommunication. Is there what we call competing stimuli, or is the animal over aroused? Because that can make them essentially unable to do what they're supposed to do. Lack of conditioning, which can lead to fatigue, rider skill, and ultimately what I think everybody should try to recognize and ask themselves, is it pain? Is ultimately all of these different behaviors that we talked about actually just signs of pain in the horse that are never going to get better with training? They're never going to get better with harsher training techniques because we have to address the underlying condition. So that is what I have for you guys tonight. So I'm more than happy to entertain some questions, or if people are interested in the course, we certainly, it is available to the public at this point in time. We're done studying the course and getting our papers published. So it's been a really fun project for me to put together.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Hiney. Let's give her a huge round of applause, a virtual round of applause, as I always say. So that was wonderful. And yes, we do have a couple questions coming in. What I do also want to do, so Kris, if you'll stop sharing your screen for just a minute, I'm going to pull up my screen really quickly and share with you the QR code. So what this is going to lead you to, if you'll take a snapshot of this or go to your phone and pull up, scan the QR code, it's going to take you to a survey. If you've done the survey the last 2 times you've been on this, please do it again. The only thing you don't have to do is write your comments out, because we've already got your comments from like, what do you want to hear in future years? But we still want to know what you found or what you heard is valuable, or how you thought this seminar was valuable compared to other years. So Kyle is also going to put a link in the chat, so you can click on the link to do the survey, or you can use the QR code. Either way works great, but I wanted to have you guys take a few minutes and do this while we're answering some questions. And hopefully you did enjoy everything. So I'm not going to share the screen, so quick take a picture of the QR code, because I really want to do the questions live. So with that being said, here we go. And if you do have more questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom. So the first question, I think, was back a little ways in your presentation, Kris, but she says, can you give a few examples of more subtle communication with your horse? And it was specifically when you were talking about the riders and how they use a lot of hands and a lot of legs, and you were talking about more subtle communication.
Yeah, I think, kind of back to the old horsemanship of do as little as it takes, right? To always interact with the horse with the idea of using as little leg, as little hand, as little posture change, like really trying to always, your goal is the softest cue possible. And keeping that at the forefront of your mind, right? And so I think we tend to go from like small, medium, loud, right? And instead maybe it's small, a little bit more, right? So make much tinier increments in your cueing. And honestly, that does take experience and skill, right? Because you have to learn how to do that physically yourself. But even, sometimes working on the ground with horses gives you an idea of how subtle you actually can be, and have them still understand and be able to recognize cues and signals.
Great. So Kris, this isn't a question, but your course has a big thumbs up and a high recommendation from one of our attendees. And they said, hopefully you'll write a paper or a book soon. But for those of you who didn't see, since they actually can't see in the chat, it's only really to us. But Kyle, if you don't mind taking Kris's links there, and you can share it with everybody so that they can see the course, and they can get a link to the course, because I know right now it only is for us to see. So we will share that in just a minute. But the next question is, what about a horse who excessively yawns during saddling and while trail riding? What can you say about that?
So yeah, in the entire course. So I would wonder, right? So yawning can be a pain, right? So a lot of people don't recognize that yawning can be pain. And so if it's always in kind of a specific context, I might wonder about that a little bit. It's also relative to stress. So I don't want you to like freak out, which is sometimes once you kind of learn the context of these things, it can be like, but just to consider, right, that it could be pain or stress.
I think that kind of goes along with the next question, only this is bucking or rearing. So does there need to be a pattern for the bucking and rearing in order for it to be pain versus something that's just occasional excitement or fear or...
Yeah, I definitely say that with pain is that you will see a pattern, like if you do this or something. And here's the horseman ability is you also have to recognize when bucking is exuberance and play behavior, right? Because horses will buck from play behavior. But if you look, and it's hard unless you have video to like go back and watch it, and that's where actually watching video can be super helpful for you, is looking at the rest of the body language of the horse and the facial features and everything, and try to put it into context. So if a horse bucked once because he hadn't been out of his stall and it was cold, I'm not going to put that in the same category, because my guess is his arousal, right? So if his overall arousal is super, super high, would I expect that bucking occurs? Yeah, right? So I'm not going to probably say that it's pain in that context, because it fits in my knowledge of horses that under high arousal, we also see those behaviors. So do we get mad at the horse because he's bucking under high arousal, or do we take and try to, okay, maybe we need the arousal down, not pharmacologically.
Very good points. Very good points. So kind of along the same lines, what about the horse that nickers when he's almost done riding, or when you're almost done riding, or when he feels like you're almost done riding, for example, when untacking or getting ready to dismount? So he nickers.
So nickering is usually what we would call linked to positive, right? So a positive affect. So my guess is he's probably happy, right? So he is excited and looking forward to what happens next. Now, if you've created a pattern of like, this is good, that he gets, you know, treats or groomed or something good, and this horse has learned that these are we call them antecedents, right? So these are the behaviors or the circumstances that predict another event happening. So that's an antecedent. And so he's reacting to, I would have to probably guess, perceived the good thing that's about to happen for him. So, and you might be like, okay, that's positive affect. So that might be a good thing, right? So that he'd be like, oh, I'm done.
Nice. So this is, I'm not going to have you answer this question, but I'm going to ask Kyle to post it in the chat again for everybody. They asked the best ways to evaluate pain in the horse. And I'm going to refer them back to Kris's talk last year, which was on evaluating pain in the horse. So Kyle, if you don't mind posting the link again to our horse management seminars from last year. Kris was on day 2. So definitely I'll refer you to listen to her talk from last year on evaluating pain in the horse. So here's another one about body work. So in your research, have you come to any conclusions regarding the most effective body work?
So I might have to preface to what I do for a living, and I'm an educator. And so the research that we do is actually on human behavior change, right? So what can we do to change people? So my job is not, I left that behind, that whole exercise physiology and things like that. But what I can say, right? So if I put in my lens of, let's look at affective state, do you see change in affect, right? So that's the whole basis of this course. Do you see change in affect of your horse after that? So some of the things that we talk about, like affiliative behaviors, fancy word for do they like it, right? So if the horse is performing affiliative behaviors, like seeking contact, then that would be, yes, they actually appreciate it. If their demeanor changes, right? So I think really looking to see objectively, right? Because I know as horse owners, we always hope something happens. That's that whole placebo, right? But trying to be objective, video them, right? So go back and watch. What does his ears look like? What does his eyes look like? What is his head position doing? What is like, so that you can actually try to objectively evaluate your horse pre and post. But again, even if they have those affiliative behaviors, they probably still enjoy it, whether it's ultimately changing something physiologically about the horse, or you're just giving them a nice massage. But that would be my suggestion, is really be clinical and really observe the horse to see what difference it makes.
And I think this is a nice follow-up question, so to say, to that, because it's a massage therapist who said, you know, we always say that yawning, and this is back to yawning, is a release of tension and stress. So why do you think that yawning can mean two totally opposite things, both pain and release?
Well, so because a release of tension, right? Tension or stress. So there was a stressor there. And this goes a little bit to the whole switching between parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And so, and kind of that switch in tone. So the other ones that you can see horses dropping, you know, the whole that everybody's been taught, if a horse licks their lips or something while you're training them, that then it's better. But ultimately what it also meant was something was stressful on the way there. So yes, it's a relief, but I think it would, on the massage therapist point, it would indicate there was something there for that relief to occur. So
That is a very good point. That's a very good way to look at that. So awesome. So I have one more question. While we're doing that question, going to share my screen one more time for the QR code for those that are left on here and want to take that survey for me one more time. But the last question we'll ask is if you've seen any studies that correlate very specific pain-associated behaviors with certain medical conditions. And the question was asked, example, like gastric ulcers, but I'm sure there's, plenty of other conditions that you can link to.
Yeah, so when we put together like the pain, we threw all of them together, and there are specific, like the horse grimace scale, the Equifax. There's different ones that they've used specifically to like do abdominal pain or like very specific types of pain. So yes, there are actually papers out there that are just only focused on behavioral changes in horses experiencing abdominal pain. But we kind of, for our purposes in education, wanted to make sure you got all of them, right? And there are some that will be more indicative of generalized pain versus localized pain. So there's a number of studies that have created their own essentially ethograms, right, relative to specific types of pain. But my interest again is making sure people recognize the whole gamut of and everything from generalized to localized pain and being able to pick up on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kris. Let's give her a huge round of applause. I think that brings us to our end. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I also see that Kyle has added in the chat the link to the survey if you didn't want to do the QR code, and also a link to the horse management webinar series from previous years. We will be sending out an email with the link to the current seminars. So if you have any friends or family that you think, yes, they absolutely need to hear this, and you're going to share it with them, that would be great. But you'll get the link. It'll probably be around the middle of March by the time we get them all edited and ready for posting. So thank you, everybody, for coming very much. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Dr. Herbst. Thank you, everybody. This has been a wonderful horse management seminar series. We have reached the end, and I look forward to hearing all your suggestions for next year. So awesome, everybody. Have a good night and a good rest of your winter, and thanks, spring.